Tutorial number 1 for 3D motion using Cinema 4D. We'll jump right in. So in this tutorial, I just want to cover just a few basics, kind of interface layout, which I'm sure students will get used to very, very quickly. A few little program conventions and a little bit of navigating, and then we'll move on to stuff relevant for our first assignment. So I will say that I'm getting ready to teach this semester. I haven't taught Cinema 4D in a class for maybe 5 years, 6 years. Actually, this was the first 3D program, or one of the first 3D programs I really cut my teeth on, just as I was finishing grad school and my first teaching gig at Kansas State University. I used it for several years and then went on to use Maya and Modo, were my two programs. Loved to use it in Modo. But I really, getting back into cinema maybe 6 months ago, I just had forgotten what a fun program, an easy program it is to use initially. It takes a lot of the hard work out. Maya is a powerful program, and certainly kind of industry best when it comes to character animating. But boy, that program has ways to try to drive you crazy. A little bit easier to deal with in cinema. So let's just talk about the basic layout here. We have a lot of menu items here along the top. We'll talk about what some of these are. Of course, you do have just full menus here. So a spline menu here, you might have certain commands. You can find a few of those just kind of as a default here. So here we could grab some of the spline making tools or some of the what we call primitives, kind of these prefabbed objects, right? I'm not going to go through all those, but a lot of the common use stuff is going to be here. On this side toolbar, in fact, I can't even remember what Cinema, I've been teaching Maya for so long, I can't remember what Cinema calls this. This is called the toolbox in Maya. Current tools, current modes, so this would be if I'm working with an object, if I'm trying to manipulate the points on an object, edges on an object, the polygons on an object, that kind of stuff. Snapping conventions, soloing, like if you have 100 objects on the screen, maybe we only want to look at one of them. Some grid conventions. Okay, so we won't worry about that. We have a 3D space. You can see there's a grid. Very important one is this object list over here. And you can see that some of these panels have multiple tabs here. These are on the side. We could create tabs all over the place if we wanted to. But we have some at this default layout here on the side. We also have the attributes, which we will use a ton, right? So really the objects and attributes, we'll talk about layers, probably won't talk much about takes in the content browser and that. But just so we can see how some of this all loads. Oh, and I guess the last thing is because I created a project, you can see the attributes of the project are down here. And so it just is a default. In fact, we could go up into preferences and change this later on, but not just do it here. Before I even get started, I'm just going to say that the FPS, the frames per second or flips per second, however you want to look at it, is 24. It's kind of a standard. I mean, it could be 30, I guess, television standards, but 24 also will work and also save us just a little bit of rendering time, which might be helpful. And we can change the length of the project time. Let's go ahead and just make the max 90, and I don't know if you saw that on the screen, but this changed down here, right? So this is the number of frames that we're dealing with. We won't get into that stuff now. We have some playback menus, some keyframing stuff down here. We haven't created anything yet, but there's a panel down here for when we create materials, which is the way we describe how the surface looks. So maybe to make this a little bit easier, let's go ahead and create an object, right? So I'm going to click on this little blue cube here, and you can see that because it has this little arrow in the corner, a little triangle, that's just showing that it's like a pull-down menu, right? This little fancy pull-down menu. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on the cube, right? And it creates this object in the screen. You can now see that it exists over here in the object list. I'm not going to get into all of these little buttons here at the very beginning, but just know that it exists here. And then we can navigate around this object, right? We're in 3D. We also, so the navigation is up here in the corner, and I'm going to talk about the hotkeys here in a second. But I can move, I can zoom in and out, and I can also rotate around, okay? This third one here is just like a toggle between a single view, and in this case, what we have is the 4 views. And I guess you can kind of see that there. I clicked, left mouse button, click there. So you can see that we have these various views. So this would be a top view. In each one of these, you can see there's an X, Y, Z, right? So side to side, up and down, and then the Z is the depth. And it's also labeled here, right? So here's the top, here's the right, here's the front. Right? And so early on, this, I'm sure this is the view that most students want to use, right? And they want to move around. They're like, wow, I'm in 3D. This is so cool. I'm going to build my own video game. But early on, don't forget the power of using these flat views. Useful as you're trying to figure out and line objects up and make sure that they're in the right position. Okay, so I have a cube here. Oh yeah, I talked about the navigating. So I can use here these to navigate. I can also just hold down the Option key, and if I hold down the Option key and I left mouse button, it rotates. If I middle mouse button, right, I move or kind of pan this around. And if I right, it will zoom in and out, right? And the whole time I'm holding down Option. This would be the right mouse button. Middle mouse button, left mouse button. Now, I am using a 3-button mouse. So if you're on a Mac and you are using, I don't know, a laptop, you're trying to animate with your trackpad, which can be done, but a little difficult. Or if you have a little magic mouse, which doesn't have the middle mouse button. Again, you can use these here, or the hotkeys. You can use, the hotkey for this is the number 1 on the keyboard, right? So you can see I pan, zoom, and rotate that way. Right? So they're a little opposite from what it is on the mouse, using the mouse, the 3-button, but any 3 of those methods. This one's probably my least favorite, just, having to click up here to get at that, right? You move around so often, you probably don't want to do that too much. There's different ways of navigating as well, as far as what you rotate around. I will talk maybe a little bit more about that later, but let's move on. So we do have the cube up here, right? And anytime I add objects to this list, I can put them in there. And down below, I have the attributes for that cube. So I have basic, every object's going to have this basic, usually just has to do with how it's drawn on the screen and what its name is, or if we assign it to a layer, or if we just want to turn it on and off. Most of the time we won't use that. Most objects certainly would have some coordinates, right? So this says, hey, I am at position X, Y, or Z. I have a scale of X, Y, and Z, and I have a rotation, if you want to think about X, Y, and Z, but I can't even remember now, the heading, pitch, and bank. Rotation's kind of a complicated thing. We won't mess with that for now, but you can see if so I'll leave those there. Let's go to the object. So we also have object properties. Object properties change based on whatever the object is, right? So I have a cube. It has a size in the X and the Y and the Z. It also has segments, we'll talk about, and we can round corners off. If I had created a sphere, in fact, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go up here and just create a sphere. And it just so happens that they're sitting right on top of each other. I'm going to go to the coordinates and just type in, I don't know, 200. There's my sphere. Right, so I moved it 200 centimeters to the right, doing that. We could also manipulate here in the space. I'll talk about that. But if I go to the object attributes for the sphere, you can see that it has a radius and segments, which is totally different than the cube. But obviously, or I would hope, that makes sense, because a cube has different properties, right, than a sphere, right? So if I were to click on the sphere, I could go ahead and, let's just make that 150, right? The other thing well, we'll come back to that. I'm going to leave that there. Right? So we have some of these properties. This little thong, this is has to do with the shading that's going on here. Basically has to do with this little tag that's right there. Okay? We'll talk about tags later on. But for now, I'm going to delete this sphere, and I'm going to put the cube back to, let's just do 200 by 200 by 200, okay? And I can also, like here's a little option here, where I can turn on how much rounding or kind of fillet surface, right? Okay, and you can also see a little helper widget has shown up here on the surface. And a lot of Cinema 4D's primitives have this setup, right? And it's usually, they're highlighted as yellow. So if I click on this, you can say I can interactively make these changes based on what I want. And also, see those little yellow, there we go. They're sitting there right next to the axis, right? They're kind of lined up on that. So if I click on that, I can scale and size that. And then the last thing, as you can see as I roll over, that these axes change, right? So this one has these arrows on it. So this means that I'm using this to move, right? And I can click on that. I can also use these little widgets here. And what that is doing is it's constraining it so that it's moving up and down and side to side, but it's not moving in the depth direction, right? So I'm constraining it into two axes, right? Not three. And if I go to my viewport here, right, you can see that it's moving side to side. This is if you look at the top view over here, you can see that it's moving side to side. If I click on this one, right, you can see it's moving all over the place, right? So that's how those little handles work. I'm going to go ahead and put this right back to 0, 0, 0. Oops, sorry, that's the properties. I'm going to put this back to 200. And the coordinates, sorry, that's what I wanted to. I'm just going to swipe through there, 0, 0, 0. Put that back at that space. Okay, how are we doing? 12 minutes, just a few more things I think here that we'll add. So those setup properties. Last thing is that we can create a material. We'll have many lectures about this, but I just want you to see the whole interface, right? We can add objects, and as you would imagine, this can get full of tons of objects over here in this list. And each time I click on them, I can have a bunch of coordinates, coordinates, object properties, all kinds of properties, depending on what type of objects we create. And I can also create material. So I'm going to come down here and just say materials, a new PBR material. We'll talk about that later. And Cinema 4D does have a lot of drag and drop conventions. So I can just take this and put it on my object. And now I have this white material. And if I went into reflectance, let's just make it this way. Okay, right. So you can see that I've created a material. I have applied it up in the object. So things that we add to an object get put onto it like tags. And sometimes you can have a whole bunch of tags over here, right? They're like extra components that we would put on top of a surface. Okay, so to recap, friendly user interface, plenty of menus up here, right? All kinds of things that we can get into and cause problems. A pretty standard list. We can add or modify this stuff if we want to. Some common tools over here. We'll just leave that for now. We have a material bin. We'd have lots of materials. I'm going to skip over this for now. An object list, and down below here, which we'll use all the time. So much work happens in these two things. This attribute list. And as you can see here, now that I've clicked on this little tag for the material, you can see I can pull up all of its attributes for this. When I click on the cube itself, I would have a different list of attributes to deal with. Okay, 15 minutes, that's about it. I will stop this one into here, and then I will move on to the next one.